Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo.
And Katie Godden from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, we're looking at the future of learning and looking at how, post the pandemic, the world of learning may look. We're delighted to welcome to the podcast Hayley Bird and Erica Farmer. Thank you for joining us today. Do you want to introduce yourselves and tell our listeners a little bit about you both?
Hi, my name's Erica Farmer. I'm a digital learning consultant, 20 years corporate learning and development experience, working with some of the biggest UK brands such as British Gas, Virgin, Specsavers and LV, and now the business director for Quantum Rise Talent Group.
Brilliant. My name's Hayley Bird. So I've worked in learning, development, education, careers sector now for about 13 years. So it's taken me on a bit of a squiggly career over that time. But I'm now also working as the learning and development director, and I focus on the delivery aspect for Quantum Rise Talent Group Limited.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. Now, we wanted to get you onto the episode today because we wanted to look at the positive future for learning and development. So there's been lots of change through the pandemic, and what we wanted to do was think about as that starts to draw to a close, and hopefully we can see the light at the end of the tunnel and we can start to go out and meet people and return to some of the more normal functions of life that we would have done this time last year or a little bit before. We can start to think about what does that mean for learning and development. So let's take a look back and think about how's the pandemic changed learning, and has it? And if so, how? So Hayley, what do you think? How's the pandemic changed learning?
I think the pandemic's changed learning massively. I don't know if it's changed or just accelerated probably some of the things that have been bubbling away now for some time. And I think that's happened across a number of sectors, but particularly in learning and development, obviously training companies, learning and development teams, education as a whole has had to go through this virtual transformation really to be able to keep going. So businesses, in order to be able to keep that function churning in this time and to really support their people through this change, they've had to embrace being able to deliver what they do really well face to face, but in the virtual space.
Erica, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this virtual learning thing's been kicked down the road probably for a lot of L&D teams, depending on the organisation that you're talking to. We were delivering online learning in LV in 2014, and it just became part of what we did. However, with some organisations, they stuck to, like Hayley says, what was done really well face to face. So I think it's changed it for several reasons. One being cost. We've recognised that, you know, some of the impact financially in the last year has impacted L&D budgets, and that has been a driver to go online. But actually, I think the organisations and L&D teams who've really taken this seriously and understood the benefits can see the benefit of really great online learning being as good as, if not better, than that perhaps traditional face-to-face space where, you know, learners might sit in the classroom all day. It's not particularly very flexible in terms of if I need to go and pick up the kids at 3 o'clock. I missed the last hour and a half's training, you know, which seems unfair when you think about it. Actually, in the online space, it provides a lot more flexibility. So I think that's been a big thing. And also it supported people's mental health during the pandemic, which has been a fundamental touch point for some people as well.
Do you just want to, so you both talked about online learning, do you just want to expand on what that means? Because it's one of those terms that we find means so many different things to different people, different organisations, even different suppliers. So what does online learning mean to you?
That's a really good question, and I think when we say online learning, that does bring about many preconceptions of what online learning is or always has been. And I suppose for me, and I don't know whether you agree, Erica, probably want to build on this, but for me it's that remote learning. It's about being able to learn from anywhere at any time, and I suppose the means of that generally is by accessing things online. So it could be a virtual classroom, so people are attending a live facilitated event which is instructor led, similar to how they would access face-to-face training, but done very, very differently. and also being able to access things like resources, materials that support and embed that learning. And then you've got more traditional e-learning solutions as well, which are likely to support some of those instructor-led sessions. So I think learning online isn't just about bringing a face-to-face session into Zoom or Teams, and it's not just about clicking a link to an e-learning module that's mandatory and has to be completed. There's such a different variety of things and places that people can access information.
Going back to pre-pandemic, we were working with clients who were in different stages of evolution on that journey. So some people who were very advanced on their journey, this was already part of what they did, and then people who weren't even in that space, everything was face to face. The whole online thing may be for a bit of compliance learning. So it's interesting to think about that. Katie, what are your views? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think definitely, like from what all of you guys have said, like people's perception of online training is definitely kind of more of a SCORM course. So I've got to go on for an hour, sit there and click and get bored. But that isn't actually online training. And what we're doing online in our everyday lives is still training. So if I need to fix something, I'll look at a YouTube video and I might find a guide. I might go to a forum. I might go to a blog. That's all still learning, but we're not reflecting that in the workplace. And I thought COVID would have been a catalyst in making that happen a bit more, but I don't think it has been actually. Now we're a year on and kind of reflecting on that. I think some people have changed their way because they've had to. So they've had to go from face to face to online, and that's fine. But whether they've done it good or not, yeah, is still to be answered. And I think there's still a way to go to actually get really good learning in the workplace that's online.
And I think coming back to that point of it's so different for different people, you've seen some people really think back and, like you said, fundamentally rebuild their teams or their offer and think about what they're trying to do. And then at the other end, people have gone, someone's just emailed me and I can put a learning platform in. It'll only take 20 days and I can push content out to everyone. And yeah, we're online now. Or gone to someone and said, here's all of our online packages. And someone said, I'll turn those into SCORM learning for you, or we can sit on Zoom all day. So I think there's been some really different responses across the piece. And what I'd like to think about is this session we want to look about the positive changes and where that's going to go going forward. So let's think about 12 to 18 months time. What would we like learning to look like given this catalyst has sped things up or moved things on? So what are your visions going forward? Erica, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because Hayley and I talk a lot about this. So we've come from two different businesses and we've come together to create one new business. And the clients that we've brought with us on the journey are the clients that are fundamentally moved very quickly in the pandemic, recognised it wasn't exactly what you've just said, I'm just going to lift it and drop it onto Zoom or lift it and drop it into SCORM, but actually started thinking about what does this mean for my 5-year plan or my 10-year plan and my fundamental learning and development strategy. It wasn't just a that's good enough, that'll do type mindset. So I think what we're starting to hear and feel now is the conversations around the blended piece, but more than that, what does our flipped classroom strategy look like? What does our blended strategy look like? What does gamification look like? And we mean proper gamification, not just putting in a leaderboard into an online learning management system. So we're working with some clients at the moment and trying to understand, how does that tie into our skills platform in the future, our apprenticeships, our vocational learning. When we were at British Gas, I was probably there kind of 5 or 6 years ago, we were then talking about, artificial intelligence and, virtual reality and how can I blow up a boiler in a client's home without actually blowing up a boiler, for our apprentices who are training to be engineers. So I think all of that is come to the forefront now in terms of real investment into good L&D. Because we recognise it's been such a thing that people have craved for over the pandemic, and that in itself has given further acceleration into taking it seriously. It's not just dropping a subject matter expert into a classroom and suddenly that's our L&D offering. It's so much more than that. So Hayley and I talk a lot about creativity, innovation, how can we engagement, interactivity, all of this stuff is fundamental to not just L&D, but your employee value proposition. how do you attract great people? How do you retain great people? So I think HR and L&D teams are having to think about this whole piece really, not just, oh my God, we need to get people compliant and we need to get them through a SCORM package. So there's definitely further conversation around the wider piece and technology happening right now.
Hayley, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in the next 12 to 18 months, I think Erica's already alluded to this in saying there's some organisations that are thinking beyond that. So there's going to be organisations now that have really shifted in terms of their own mindset and approach to their L&D strategy. And I think that's going to kind of pave the way for the future, really. And I think the acceleration that we've gone through and what we've been almost forced to do has actually really opened the eyes of a lot of organisations to think about how can they embed learning better in the workplace. You know, we've all been on training courses where we've travelled somewhere, stayed overnight, sat in a room for a day, had some good conversations and gone back to the workplace and nothing really tangible has changed, or one or two key elements of that might stick and might translate into action in the workplace. But now we've got an opportunity to break that down into much smaller chunks and to learn that information whilst you're sat in the environment that you're going to apply it. And I think there's a real opportunity now to be able to bring a lot of that to life and to really start to embed change in terms of skills, knowledge, behaviours in the workplace by accessing training at a time when it's more relevant as well.
And I think, you know, you raised some key points there, and I think we've all been there, and we've probably all at points in our career been architects of things that weren't the greatest, you know. And I remember being back in organisations and you could only get people out for a day, and you had to get as much as you could in the day, and it just becomes, you know, you think of it, it's just a daft outcome. It doesn't really work, but at the time that was the evolution we were on, and that was better than what came before. And I think for any organisation, from my point of view, you can come in and look at it at a point of time and go, it's not great, or it could be better. And I think it's as long as it's on a journey, and as long as that's not stagnated where it is, you want to be able to progress and take those things forward. So I don't think there will be an ideal 12 to 18 months, in my opinion, but I think there will be hopefully evolution to some of those things. Katie, what are you seeing in terms of hopes and beliefs that you'd want to see in the next 12 to 18 months for people?
I think it's people using like the innovation and the creative ideas that they've had in COVID in general and applying that, and like their change in mindset as well, because I think everyone has had to check. Well, we all had to change. There isn't anyone that hasn't had to, but whether it's kind of like going to the gym and like doing that differently, like in front of the TV with YouTube, or I don't know, downloading an app and going running that way, or doing more baking, but like all those things that you're like your normal life, and Zoom drinks on a Friday evening with your mates, all those normal things you changed, you adapted, and you were able to kind of form some sort of normal life back again, weren't you? So I'm hoping that people can use that innovation, that creativity to kind of run with their learning and actually put that in the workplace and use all the great things that people are doing, and not just go back to what they were doing before in the same old kind of boring workshops, online courses. Make it fun for people so they actually want to be part of it.
And I think, you know, the last year has given L&D stretch and new career opportunities and, you know, access to new technologies that perhaps we wouldn't have even thought about before as well. So I think it's great to talk about the learner and the organisation, but let's think about the benefit to L&D and what does that mean for us as well?
Yeah, Erica, I'd pick up on that, because my thoughts are, it's really, I want it to fundamentally change what we're doing in L&D, to look at it from a different perspective, because a lot of the innovation I've seen in my 20-odd year career has been to fix L&D problems, not to fix business problems. So, you know, if I think back of the evolution of learning tech, so my first bit of learning tech was, I think, 2001. And, you know, we were putting stuff in to solve a problem, and then we went, and you've seen that evolution. I've seen the move, but it hasn't really helped solve business problems. I actually think the first bits of learning tech were about solving business problems, and then other bits of learning tech have added on to make those bits of learning tech less cumbersome, because you do something and it changes it. So, you know, if we think SCORM learning came about just to get compliance reporting and to be able to not take people out of classrooms to do their fire safety training, then we get learning experience platforms, which, because we want to have something that feels more like our consumer life. But you then come back, and it's back to what you talked about earlier about doing something real in the workplace, back to the apprenticeship, where you can say, right, people don't really understand risk. You know, we force everyone in every organisation to go through fire training, yet there's probably not much nuance, and we manage to get through our day-to-day lives without creating fire or burning ourselves down or any of those things. But then you go into a workplace where the high risk may be different, or you go into a workplace where there isn't really very much high risk, but they can be treated in exactly the same way, but if you're ticking a box. Whereas what you be doing to drive the business performance or change of culture. And I think there's so many systems, so many different ways of working to change how we look at learning and go, let's forget about learning as an outcome. Let's think about business innovation as an outcome, career progression, realizing your potential. Because I think if we try to make learning the outcome, we get stuck in a curriculum-based, course-based mentality where I'm assessed off against my knowledge and I'm probably given a bit of a sheep dip approach. Whereas we all, the four of us, are all learning professionals with a ton of experience, but we will all have a very different starting point, very different skill sets. And the point to develop us forward will be different because we want to go in different directions as well. Yeah, if we were four people sat in a customer service centre somewhere, we'd probably get the same learning approach, and but yet we could have come from equally different backgrounds. So that's my hope, is that we have something that's really knitted back to business problems, but also takes the best of the personalisation we can drive through.
Just going back to Katie's point as well around some of the, not wanting to lose all the great stuff that's happened, the great stuff we've invested ourselves in the last 12 months is, how amazing would it be if we could keep hold of all the great stuff we've learned and be able to really make that even better and continue developing that whilst being able to introduce some of the things that we really missed as well, without going 100% one way or the other, but being able to really, we're going to be in a position now where we're going to have that benefit of experience that we've just gone through with all those things that we already did and worked really well before that we've had to let go of, and be able to combine the two. And I think that's where the magic will really start to happen going forward.
And that's where L&D has an opportunity. Back to your point there, James, we can't just all go back to the sheep dip in the classroom, facilitating off of PowerPoint, bullet points, etc. We've now, and this is how we like to work with our clients, we now as L&D have an opportunity to set the tone for that digital future. You look at the World Economic Jobs Report, look at the next 10 years. I think it's 8 out of the 10 skills that are required in the workplace over the next 10 years are digital skills. And funnily enough, the other two are emotion intelligence and communication. So no surprises there. So actually, forward-thinking L&D now needs to be sitting down at the table. And by the way, if you don't already have a chair at the table, you go and make yourself a chair at the table and sit down and say, right, guys, let's have a look at our business strategy. Let's have a look at our ed tech. Let's have a look at our employee value proposition. Let's have a look at our Gen Z strategy or whatever it might be, and say, what do our customers want from us? Well, we know that a lot of customers want that, that kind of Amazon quick swipe to buy type approach where it's less hassle for me. I don't want it to interfere with my day-to-day routine as a consumer. Don't want to have to pick up the phone and speak to a contact center because there's an issue. How can we digitize our whole mindset around this, not just provide training on how Microsoft Teams works? And don't get me wrong, there's a place for that, of course there is, but actually we've got an opportunity now to really start to shape and influence what that future looks like for our clients and our stakeholders and our customers.
It's putting the people of the organisation at the centre of everything that you design, isn't it? And thinking about that accessibility, that flexibility, and not just accepting that as a byproduct of digital learning, but actually maximising it to its true potential. Definitely.
I think it is that, we talk about blend and people will think blend is, the bit of classroom, bit of online, but no, the blend is the organisational blend. And one of the things I've talked about is the evolution I've seen in training is, people will talk about originally you would facilitate a room of people, you might facilitate one person in a conversation or someone, a set of people in online learning. We've also got a skill now to facilitate an organisation and facilitate everyone in a more collective and cohesive way. And L&D can't be the knowledge police. They can't be the block in the chain. They can't be the control mechanism that maybe they've been in the past. And Erica, you talked about the seat at the table, and I've been in broader HR roles in lots of my career as well. I've had recruitment roles, and you have to look at it holistically. But in so many organisations I've been in, HR has been fighting for a seat at the table, and L&D hasn't even had a seat on the HR table, which is one step below that. So it's looking at how L&D becomes its own function, as a right within the overall people experience, but also with the business, looking at business performance, because you've got to look at data, you've got to look at linking into processes, you've got to look at workforce planning. You can't just be thinking about curriculum, classroom, maybe linking into an HR strategy, maybe getting once a year TNA out that you do something. It's got to be more holistic and wider than that.
And some of that, James, is the story that we tell ourselves as learning and development professionals. Why are we learning and development professionals? Why are we not performance professionals or business outcome professionals? Because if that's what we're truly going to focus on, then our coach, Hayley and I employ a coach. Our coach talks about, the words that you use are what starts to drive your own behaviour. So let's think about holding that ugly mirror up to ourselves and say, what's going well, but what could be even better for us? Because we're very good at giving out this advice to our stakeholders and our clients, but how good are we at actually looking at that mirror, understanding what's our own accountability in that space? I think that's where we need to start with this stuff.
Yeah, and interestingly, we had a very long debate when we set up our business. So we call our business is called The Learning Effect, and we talked about, we wanted to be about outcomes. We wanted to be about, doesn't have to be big to make a change. It's actually those little things that make a difference. So we based our logo on the butterfly effect, and it all came from there. But the one word that we struggled with most was learning. And we're like, we do want to be the learning effect, but we don't, because we wanted to take people towards that performance outcome. We wanted to take people to being more business performance, but we thought if we do that, people will think it's performance management. People will think, so we've got to take people on that journey. And so I think, that language and the way that we take people and evolve that journey, and don't just go in and what I most hate about our industry is actually seeing all the experts, and you see this on LinkedIn every day, actually taking chunks out of learning professionals, like what they're doing is wrong, or that something is bad, and standing on their high horse and preaching about the perfect future. I've been that person in a business who's come along and fought to change and take it on a journey, and someone can come in, land on day one and go, well, this isn't very good, isn't it? And you don't want to go, well, you should have seen it 6 months ago. But you want people to understand that everyone is on that journey, and we need to help people. And I'd like to sort of think from us, what do we need to do as an industry to get to that point where we can start to realise that vision of 12 to 18 months time we were talking about earlier? What changes need to happen? What do we need to help people with?
It's a good question. I think one of the things that I'm noticing that's standing out as you ask that question, James, is around people's understanding of what this actually looks like, and that could be because that's not there yet. We don't know what that looks like. But I think some of the language, and this goes back to that use of language, some of that, so terms like blended learning, online learning, which you mentioned at the beginning, e-learning, they all bring with them different understanding and experiences. So I think sometimes when you talk, even take the word blended learning, for example, that is seen differently by different people in different organisations, all in L&D, but what that looks like and how it comes to life can be really challenging. So you talk about it and you assume you're all on the same page, but it's that typical, as you're on the journey, and we work with a number of clients around this, obviously at the moment, Erica and I, and as you start entering into that journey of blended learning, you realise that you're having to align yourselves along the way to get to the outcome that you both expected. I think that's a big thing there, is actually what does that endpoint even look like? If we're looking at bringing in different mediums, different way of learning, we talked about accessing, whether it's podcasts, accessing information online, instructions, as you said, Katie, you go to the internet to find things. So how does that look? How do you embed that into a strategy? And I think that feels like a big piece of work that needs to be done.
And but I think following on from that as well, it's not one size fits all. So that's going to look different through different organisations. I think that's one of the things that we've got an issue with at the moment. If you're in a specific industry, they go out and look for the same industry and what they're doing and copy it. If you do that, you're going to get the same thing everywhere, but you're not going to achieve the same results because different businesses have different problems. Yeah. So I think hopefully we can use like how we're learning and that kind of mentality to then bring that into the workplace, but still have that level of understanding that will look different in different workplaces, because you've got different job types. You might have warehouses, you've got different levels of training that you do need to give people. So people aren't setting fires everywhere, James, and they're not hurting themselves everywhere. But so that there is a difference with that. So it is having that understanding, but I think is trying to change people's mindsets to what that is and kind of go away from online training's boring and dull. And that's the big step that we need to take. Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right, Katie. And what comes with that is empowerment. James, you said earlier, knowledge police, in terms like we're the blocker in the chain, aren't we? We're the people that say, I could give you a little bit of L&D budget, but I'm not too sure. Go away and write a paper for me. And hang on, that's not where we should be at all. We should be empowering and enabling for you to go and own your own career and your own development, and curating the best kind of materials, and not going away and writing a 10-week course, and then by the time you've written the 10-week course, it's out of date anyway and nobody's interested. So it's about, I think, elevating our own expectations of what this means, and how can we open the door rather than kind of close the gates that we're kind of sometimes known for, I suppose. Not being the function that says no, because saying the function that is yes, as long as we can do this to the best possibility and the best outcome that we can for our people and our clients. It's that mindset shift again, but within ourselves.
I think, Erica, on your point there, it's the democratization of learning is something I,
that's a good term, James. Democratization of learning.
But I've always felt you get into organisations and, you said someone's got to come and write a paper or request some budget, and the budget tends to be ring fence to maybe your sales function, because that's where money comes in, or your big population functions, or your high potential people in an organisation. You find learning budget tends to have been structured around initiatives or structural things within an organisation. And for me, it's all very good to stand and offer a vision of a future, which often is opaque and misunderstood. And Hayley talked about how we could say this is something and 100 people will understand it differently. But if we don't help learning professionals on that journey, in that being creative. So if you've got a budget that's ring fenced to here, and here, we're facing a pandemic, we're coming out at the end of that, we're then facing a recession. Some businesses have done amazingly well, some have just about scraped by. And there's going to be a challenge on everyone's budget. And I think helping L&D people understand how to really creatively and innovatively use their budget to achieve business results, and be able to step back from some of those big programs that are eating up a lot of the budget and maybe aren't adding as much value as they can. So to me, there's a real opportunity to drive change through adding value back, but we need to help people see what those solutions are and give people the freedom to do something different, to try a different approach to that, to experiment, which again is some of that fear of, I've got the budget, I need to be seen to be doing something, I need to measure something. So if we can empower people to align to business goals, treat that budget like it is your own money. We run small businesses, we know what that's like. You have to really think about what's happening and give people that level of control and that level of empowerment, because I think that will get the innovation and creativity we're talking about. If you're coming along with what's happened before and someone's saying, well, how are we going to do our hypo program? That's the wrong question. It's how are we going to make sure our highly talented people progress and are retained and engaged in the business, and we're able to give everyone, just not those 20 people, the opportunity to progress. So to me, it's asking the better questions will help drive the innovation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And what comes with that as well is enabling experiences for people, going back to the language piece as well. So, running a business, you're absolutely right. You learn things that you'd never even consider when you were in corporate L&D. And budget management is a classic example of that. Decision making, commerciality, I can't even think of the things that you learn, but it is completely different. So one of the things that I rant about a little bit is, and I was terrible for this when I was at British Gas, is sometimes how HR and L&D treat their subcontractors and the 90-day payment terms. And you're both smiling, so I can see that that's obviously a conversation that you guys have had at some point, like we have. So I wish I'd gone and sought development when I was managing various training companies and subcontractors when I was at British Gas, because I probably wasn't in the space where I recognised I could have been a lot better to them. I could have treated them better. I could have supported them as a true partnership rather than a master-servant type relationship. So I think the requirement on the in-house L&D is now very, very different compared to it was 18 months ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because to your point, we're not going to have the big fat budgets that we used to have where we're spending 90k on a senior L&D business partner and 150k on a head of L&D. We don't have that money anymore, but what we do have is access to some really, really great people in the market who can flex like a concertina in regards to your requirements, but you've got to treat them right. You've got to pay them on time. You've got to spend the time giving them the right brief. All of these skills are new for in-house L&D, I think. So it's the requirement, and that's just one example. There's a massive requirement for in-house L&D to now say, right, what is my state of play? And what do I need to be able to manage that in that space? Sorry, that was a little bit soapbox there, but I generally think there's a requirement for that now.
I think there's so many more components, isn't there, now to what we're doing. So you've got things, if you think about all the different elements that a virtual learning offer creates in terms of components, it's different now, isn't it? So a day's face-to-face program might become 4 or 5 different elements, and there might be 1 or 2 or 3 different specialists that can provide those elements. So I suppose you're having to deal with more components, more people, and that's bringing a different thing to it as well. And I think one of the things that as I've been listening to you all talking, I've just been picturing this square peg in a round hole, and I think that sort of starts to summarize for me where we are in terms of where L&D was to where L&D is going. And you can't keep squeezing, or trying to ram your square peg into a round hole, because it's not going to fit. And I think that to me summarizes and starts to reflect quite a lot of the things that we've spoken about already today. Is people are lifting and organizations are lifting what they've done really well and sort of bringing that into the online space and expecting that to take off in the same way, and then become confused as to why that's not happening or why it's not having the same effect.
I think you've seen some interesting transitions, just picking up on both of those points, because I hate that L&D bashing, but there are a set of people out there who are stuck in quite a difficult place. Katie and I were talking about this earlier, actually, that people who are in head of L&Ds or senior roles in L&D might previously have almost ignored online stuff until the last year. A lot of people have devolved that down into their teams. Not everyone, there's some people, but there are a set of people out there who are now heading functions they are struggling to keep up to understand. And it's quite a lonely position to be in for those people. And having that help and support and trying to reimagine what the future looks like. And there's so much unhelpful information out there for them, because we work a lot with L&D tech and tech providers, and they all look the same. Some of them have got great marketing. They'll use a load of jargon that doesn't help you. And you're sat there looking at this market, trying to work out what you should do. Meanwhile, you're being sold these success stories from elsewhere of amazing results. And if you scratch below the surface, they're normally implementation stories, if we're being honest. They're normally, we've managed to get 30,000 people using this system every day. And people get caught up in this whole, I need to do this and I need to make this work. And it's being able to step back and have that space of, I'm trying to achieve something here. I probably need a different set of support than I did before. I can't be the person who knows everything. I might need to bring some partners in from outside. I might need to upskill my team. I might need to make some difficult choices around my team and restructure that. But that's a difficult place to be in. And And people are not normally used to doing that. And Hayley, you talked about almost that procurement function as well. And Erica, you've talked about that, where some people will just buy in training and they're very good at that relationship. And now they're having to manage more than just relationships and an in-house function. So that's changed for those people. Other people have been entirely in-house, but now they can't be, they need to procure in. So I think there's so much moving, shifting world for people that having that support, having that openness, having that dialogue, being able to work with people and have constructive conversations is going to help people. But we need to be open about that stuff and not just present this perfect picture and I'm doing great, or we've got to have that space for people to be vulnerable. This isn't working. I'm not sure what to do here. Has anyone done this? And there are spaces that people do that, but there are also lots of I'm just going to show my best bit, or I'm just going to show the equivalent of my classroom full of people on Zoom, all happily engaged. And we need to get past that to really collaborate on the future.
Well, I mean, that's social media for you as well, isn't it? That's life. That's what we all see out there, whether it's L&D or whether it's life in general. People post the best bits. And I suppose that, you know, there's always going to be a reason why you don't always hear the harder stuff. But without hearing it, you don't really know. There's no way of being able to support the wider function, and it is absolutely critical at the moment, I think, for teams to get through this. And L&D, you know, it's fundamental at the moment, because almost any organisation that you speak to is going to be going through a change. And what happens when organisations start going through tech change? L&D come in to support and implement training and interventions to support that. So I think it's fundamental that we get this right at this point. And I think there's a real risk with this turning point now, as we start to come out of lockdown and things start to change and businesses are planning ahead. There's a real risk to think, oh, well, we haven't touched on it yet and we don't need to now. You know, and that might, well, we might start to see that play out maybe in the next few months as well.
Yeah, I think organisations probably relied on their people as well, like during COVID, to kind of make all those changes, and they did loads of great things and they changed everything, got everything turned around quick. And then I'd hate for them to then go back coming out of lockdown to then not trust those people, because I think you find that in organisations like pre-COVID, people didn't trust their people. So you probably have tons of great SMEs, content creators, whatever, in your business, but they don't recognize that because they think only L&D can be those people. But things are changing. We've got people that use TikTok and that they use Instagram. You know, people are making content all the time. Why don't we do that? You know, and it would be a shame to see that for organizations because they'll lose their people in the end, won't they? Because they're not going to have that trust and that honesty. So
something that's always really baffled me on that point as well is we're addicted to our phones. We're on our phones all the time. You know, we lose hours looking at our phones. So yet for some reason we just welcome that and we almost can't come off it. So what's the difference when it comes to virtual learning or gathering information from the internet, which enables us to learn and grow within our organizations? That's where we seem to struggle to find that engagement and really engage people with what's happening in front of them. Yet with shopping, with the news, with whatever we go off and find on Twitter or Instagram, we get absolutely lost in clickbait and looking at the next thing. And I think where that feels to me like a gap. How can that sort of clicking from one thing to the other, you know, how can that be mirrored within the learning and development teams? How can we, because that would empower people to learn for themselves, because they'd be finding the things they want to find, they'd be seeing the things that they want to see, just like we all do online all the time.
I think that's a bit of forced fun, though. That's how it seems. It's fake fun. You're working, making it for you. They're pushing it out, and it kind of feels like you have to do that. And I think because traditionally you're always forced to do learning, aren't you? So whether it's your fire safety, your manual handling, whatever. And then if that team's then creating content for you, it might be really good content, but you're kind of like, part of you doesn't want to look at it just because of what you've had that experience of before. So you need to really change that and not come across as learning. Like when I've done it before, having things as comms actually works better, and then attaching learning onto the back of that. So you're kind of getting people in by having a cool headline, but then going, but if you want to know more about this, here's a video on it or whatever. So I think it's just changing the way that people do it, and you're more kind of marketing and advertising your learning and getting those clickbait bits in to draw people in, as opposed to kind of pushing that out and making them do it.
comes down to empowerment again, doesn't it? And organizational culture, and how we parental as L&D historically, telling people what to do and why, and if you don't do your training you'll get a report that goes to the head of and they'll come and tell you off, and we've all been
they
there.
haven't done it either.
Well, I mean, they'll be the last person to do it, right? Oh, you're the last person to do it.
Yeah, you've not done it. You're sending out the report, which is always
you don't
irony
you have
in
to.
Yeah, you wrote
You're sending it to their
you don't
boss.
have to do it, Eric.
Yeah, L&D exempt. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's leading by example as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's so true, actually. So true.
I think one of the key things that I've definitely seen in lockdown, and I hope that will continue, and it was International Women's Day yesterday, wasn't it? And it was fantastic seeing the amount of people, male and female and other genders and etc., just really collaborating and celebrating the people that they work with and the people that challenge them and the people that help them and all this kind of stuff. And I've really seen that accelerate over the last 18 months. And maybe that's my view of the world because I've been in business for 18 months. That might be why I've seen more of that compared to corporate. But actually, I hope that's something that really starts to continues to play through once everything kind of starts to settle down a little bit.
I think to me it's around purpose as well. So previously we were trying to force, you've talked about force fun or pushing things out, being parental, which one of the jobs of an organisation is to help people to create a what's in it for me. Why should I do this? Not just get lost in endless track of stuff, but be more purposeful in how I'm spending my time. And one of the things I found about the pandemic is almost you feel like you've had less time in some ways, and you have to use your time quite valuably, and you don't have that sort of more a conversation like this, which is more exploratory. You tend to get more agenda driven stuff and things like that. Whereas if we're looking at purpose going forward, we need to get into people's lives and say, look, this may not be compliance with forcing out to you. This is something that's going to help you. So if we're talking around their job, top tips, people will all do that in their personal life. Top tips on this, a recipe that's going to improve that. But if it's linked back to positive enhancements they can see in their job, and putting that somewhere where they can get it helps. But sometimes as an organisation, we have to change the mindset of people, or we have to get people to see beyond what they can see. And that might be like you talked about the World Economic Forum and skills earlier, Erica. We might be having to say to people, you don't see that in 6 months' time, this job has, or this skill set has a limit on it. So we're going to have to create that what's in it for me. And I think there's a different set of skills within forcing out learning to people that they can see the benefit of, and actually think about how we transition mindset, open up more opportunities for people to collaborate and shape a future that's less certain. And if we haven't learned that this year, I don't know what we have learned. So how we can put that into practice on an ongoing basis to help people lead better into ambiguity. Because lo and behold, organisations that couldn't work from home achieved it in a few weeks. People who couldn't service customers in a remote way have achieved it in a few weeks. So I think it's trying to take that forward and keep that going so that we can approach every problem in a way that doesn't feel as rushed, but maybe feels like it has that level of drive, innovation, creativity. We'll get it sorted. We'll keep innovating and moving.
It's given us some great training content, all this, hasn't it, in managing change and leadership, and we've got some good stuff to start, good examples to start drawing on. And I think I'm using it all the time, talking about how when I'm doing leadership and management training, often using COVID as a great context to open those conversations and get people reflecting on what they've been through and how they can use that to get better at managing and leading through ambiguous times. Definitely. And I think there's two elements here, because we've talked quite a lot around mindset, but Erica and I talk all the time about this being a mindset shift and a skill set shift, and how the two align, because it's all very well, we've talked a lot about people having to shift their mindsets at the moment to be able to think differently, approach things differently, but with that comes a completely different set of skills. So it's about supporting both of those things, isn't it, in L&D, so that they can really support each other, and so that people feel supported and not hung out to dry, because people are going through challenging times and they need to know that they're in this safe environment, and a psychological safety within organisations, I think, is becoming more and more important now as well.
Yeah, and that's the need for that to be driven from the top as well, and what kind of, I guess, top down, grassroots up. So, we're hearing a lot around this tidal wave of mental health challenges, which is coming towards us quite quickly now. Are we setting up our leaders and managers to have compassionate conversations? So rather than, just managing tasks, and we've probably talked about this for like the last 20 years in L&D around, psychometrics, tasks versus people focus and all that. But actually, James, to your point earlier around practical tips, are you sitting down, whether that's through a screen, face to face, whatever, and saying, how are you? Just tell me what the last 18 months has been like for you. How are the kids? What's been going on at home? Are we setting up our managers and leaders just to have those human conversations? Or are we setting them up to look at software that tracks how many clicks per day our people have been doing while they've been working at home? I've heard both stories. I'd like to think there's more of the former than the latter, but is there? I don't know. And as L&D people, are we thinking around compassionate leadership, psychological safety, this kind of leadership culture and climate that we need to be forging to enable our workforces to come to work and be productive and look after themselves? Because that is a bigger thing now. The look after themselves is a lot bigger than what it was before.
And that's got more complex as well, because, with the working from home debate, the return to the office debate, and we regularly talk about this, and there seems to be the two, everyone says, oh, people always need choice. And then I very strongly believe that people don't always have that choice either, and my fear is we roll forward to a world where having a workplace is not a right, and therefore you don't have a choice of going to work. The expectation is, I'm going to interview Erica, you Hayley. Erica, you can work from home. Hayley, it's challenging for you to work from home, so cheaper for me, I'll take Erica. Do you know what I mean? There could be a whole thing around looking at the implications and the broader things that people need to consider as leaders and managers and even HR functions and businesses, to look at the world in a more holistic way that's not so black and white, that can be measured by clicks. Because, you might be in a 5-bed house where you can bake bread on your lunch break and go for country walks, which is some people's version of working from home. You might be in a 2-bed flat homeschooling 6 people with 2 other flatmates. There's a whole set of difference that people are dealing with and will continue to deal with. And I think having that richer approach and skill set has become more important. But broadening that out and helping people to develop in that way is critical, because I think it will evolve. Today, we've talked on lots and lots of subjects about the future of L&D. Is there any last messages or anything else you haven't mentioned so far that you want to share?
For me, it's don't be afraid to do something different. Don't just ping back to how it was before. What's gone well, what could be even better. Challenge yourself around that. Make a difference. Because it's easy just to kind of go back and do what we've done before.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think no matter how far along this journey you are, it doesn't matter. Just be on the journey. So, if you've not even started thinking about transforming L&D to the future, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that when lockdown ends, we can just carry on and ping back. At least take the first step and start on that journey at whatever point you're at. I think is important at the moment as well.
Katie?
Yeah, kind of the same as above. I can't think of anything else, because I'm just trying to think of what we haven't said. We spoke about a lot of different things, but I think one of my points before is just using that innovation and that kind of flexibility and that kind of open mindset approach that we've had to have, because things have forced us to do that, because we've gone through something no one has ever gone through before. Continue with that and use that, not just even in learning, just in all aspects of people's lives as well, and just be more kind to people as well, and have that level of understanding that people do think about things differently to you. You're not always right, and sometimes there isn't a right or wrong answer anyway, and be more open to kind of different processes in the way that you can do it, because again, it might change things for the better. So
yeah, I think for me, it's one of the messages I've taken away from our conversation is just that everyone's on an individual journey, and they're going to be working through, they're going to be trying that, but they're not on their own. you don't have to be on your own on that journey. There's people out there you can share, there's support out there, there's learning you might need to do. So, you know, embrace that journey, embrace that change, and try to make that journey right for you. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a really, really great conversation in terms of, you know, bouncing off each other, lots of different ideas. If people do want to connect with you, find out a little bit more about yourselves, how's the best way of them doing that?
Yeah, so the company is Quantum Rise Talent Group Limited. So Hayley at quantumrise.co.uk or Erica at quantumrise.co.uk. Normal social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Get in touch, reach out, and we'd love to help.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And we'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes below. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for joining us today, James. I think it's really interesting that you're saying that 44% of skills will actually change by 2025. And obviously now we're in 2021, that's not too far away. So it's something that we definitely need to start looking at as an industry.